So I'm Susan Feligi. I'm faculty at the University of North Dakota. We are working on a grassland bird project looking at productivity of grassland birds on places where we have different types of grazing regimes. Producers move their cattle and a lot of times use what's called rotational grazing, and they move them at varying lengths and have different numbers of cattle or densities of cattle within paddocks of different sizes. And so what's becoming more and more common is to put a large number of cattle or high density of cattle in smaller paddocks and then move them more frequently. And the idea behind that is that they really graze the area very intensely, very rapidly, and then they move on, and that particular paddock, or cell as some people call them, ultimately gets rested for a long period of time. More traditional rotational grazing, as this is called, where there's a lower density of cattle, but they're rotated more on like 4 to 5 week periods of time, sometimes a little longer than that, is a pretty common practice. And we're seeing this more rapid grazing becoming adopted more, and it's thought to be better for producers in a lot of different ways for cattle. And we want to know, what's it do for birds, grassland birds? So why care about this? Well, a lot of us like to eat beef, and we need to keep cattle producers on the landscape, not only to help us from a human side of feeding people, but it's a tough, ranching is a tough lifestyle, and keeping up with it, having large enough landscapes, and the ability to even keep ranching on the landscape when we have periods of drought and a lot of different drastic changes to the environment. You know, ranchers need to be able to do that and do it in a sustainable way. The same token, birds have really survived on this landscape because of large disturbances, such as historically we would have had bison come through and graze the grasses and give these periodic disturbances. There would have been fire on the landscape. And so mimicking those, we can do that with cattle. And so that's good for birds, and that's good for the cattle to be able to do that, and it's good for people to be able to have the food that's produced from it. So the whole idea behind this is to try to put birds in and keep the cattle on the landscape to help the birds, but also help the ranchers. Keeping of the grasslands is absolutely important. Grasslands do all kinds of different things for us from an ecosystem standpoint. They're not only great for just grassland birds, a lot of the species that we like to hunt, grouse, sharp-tailed grouse, ducks, upland nesting ducks, for example, all benefit from these grasslands. There's a lot of people who like to go out and bird watch. You know, grasslands are great from a recreational standpoint and super important to the state of North Dakota, where outdoor recreational tourism is our third biggest industry. And then with grasslands, they produce, you know, for cattle, they produce forage for us to feed cattle and ultimately, you know, get the beef from that. Grassland also play a role in carbon sequestration. They play a role in soil health. They're important in having clean water and filtering things. So grasslands do a lot for us and play a really important role from an ecosystem services point of view, and for just everyday enjoying conservation and outdoor activities. So this is a project that's got a lot of collaborations. Obviously we're working with Ducks Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy. The project was funded through a state wildlife grant with North Dakota Game and Fish and the Fish and Wildlife Service. And then of course we can't do anything that we do without landowners. What's good for herds is oftentimes good for birds. And so right now what we're trying to figure out is how to best recommend grazing practices that might be beneficial for both those herds and for the birds to promote them. And looking at these two different types of rotational grazing to see whether or not one is better than the other and under what scenarios it might be. So lots of partnerships with that respect. And of course, you know, we've got Taylor with the University of North Dakota as a graduate student. And then we have technicians from all over actually coming in to help with this as well. So it's a large project.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Linder. I am a PhD student at the University of North Dakota. Today we're out here in central North Dakota, right on the edge of the Prairie pothole region, and we're looking at the effects of rotational grazing and the effects that it has on grassland birds. So today we're out here kind of doing a nest drag this morning. We're starting off our morning about 8 a.m. here. A lot of those chance the waterfowl get back on nests after their morning recess, and we're going to come out here and, like I said, do a drag. So I've got Matt and Evan out here today, a couple of my technicians doing their work, and then this afternoon we'll go out and check some nests. We got about a dozen nests to check on 3 other sites. So we'll go out there and do that, and then kind of sit down and do our data. So yeah, today we're here on this is a longer rotational grazing plot. Like I said, right here in smack dab of central North Dakota. This one hasn't yet been visited by cattle and grazed by cattle. It'll actually be grazed later this summer. But what we're looking for is direct effects to see how the cattle are out here gonna change the vegetation structure while they're in here. And so we're gonna see how, for one, how birds react to that in the immediate, in the now, and see how current nests might be affected, but also how other, maybe species composition of those birds might change as the vegetation changes. And that's ultimately what we're after between these two grazing systems. So as I mentioned, we're here on a longer rotational grazing system, but we're also looking at the effects of this different high intensity short duration systems that we have out here on the landscape. Ultimately trying to decide, is there a difference between the two, and what is that difference going to look like in terms of productivity, species composition, etc. So because the vegetation here was grazed pretty heavily last year following the drought, there is a little bit of vegetation, but it is pretty sparse still. So out here we might find species like chestnut collar longspurs today. We might find a waterfowl or grouse if we're lucky, but we also might find some sort of grasshopper sparrow or meadowlark. But there's really not a lot of litter depth here, so I wouldn't expect to find too many of those. But of course, when you get higher vegetation like this, they're certainly to be abundant, and they are going to be prominent in this landscape. So we're out here on plot today walking through, and we actually stumbled upon and was able to flush a bird right away. And so we've got little chestnut collar longspur eggs here. There's 3 of them in this small nest right here. It's probably no bigger than a couple golf balls put together. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this candler and look up at the sunlight with the egg in it and try to gauge development of that embryo inside the egg to really understand more about how she's developing, which will allow us to better understand and address things like initiation date, hatch day, etc., which will ultimately help us figure out the productivity of these different grassland songbird species here in North Dakota. Overall, the egg's pretty clear, so she's probably just starting to develop, if not still laying. But if nothing else, she's maybe 2 days. But usually we typically try to candle a couple different eggs just to make sure that we're not getting the one in there that might be a dud or infertile. So we'll typically, like I said, grab 2 or 3 depending on how many are in the nest. This one's also younger, so I'm guessing she's probably still laying. Once we understand kind of the nest characteristics of the eggs and how they're developing, then we'll have a couple of my guys come in and they'll do some vegetation measurements and understand more about some of the metrics that go into this and why she selected this site and how that will play into the ultimate nest success or nest failure that she might go through.
Right now he's marking the exact coordinates right above the nest, just so we can kind of have an idea when we come back and check the nest to see further development, look for nestlings. So we have those coordinates, and what we're going to do is we're going to take some vegetation measurements, like Taylor was saying, just to kind of see why she selected the nest she selected. So it's looking to longspurs like kind of a short grass with a kind of a shorter litter depth, which is the grass on the ground here. So we're going to take a litter depth measurement with a ruler. Yeah, I don't have a ruler. Grab yours. And then this is a robel pole. So this is going to measure kind of vertical cover as well of the nest. It's looking have about a centimeter of litter depth here. So again, that kind of allows just for kind of some structure of the basic bottom of the nest, and then just kind of gives an idea of what the bird's foraging in when she's going to be trying to build the nest as well. So we're going to be taking vertical measurements from each of the cardinal directions here, so I'll hold this, you go ahead. For south. Again for east. Again for north.
We put the clips out so when we come back to do nest checks, which we do about every 3 to 4 days, we do them, so that just allows us to better locate the nest. I marked it on my GPS, but it's still, your GPS can only get to so much accuracy, and so you use them pins to kind of narrow it down between where you're going.
So we just flushed a grouse who's actually going to be sitting right up here, and I'm guessing, does she have a nest over there? I'm guessing the way she flushed, she's probably got a brood around here somewhere, so we might be able to hear them peeping. But she just flushed out of here, so we're gonna go in and see if we can find the nest now, and if we do find the nest, we're able to take measurements on it, and kind of gauge that nest success as well as it relates to these different grazing programs. I bet she's got chicks.
That's what I thought.
Because normally they would, if it was a nest, they would fly way over the hill.
Yeah.
She'd come back in a couple hours once the predators or us, we left, but the way she's sticking around, holding real tight, makes me think that she's probably got...
You're probably right. They're probably hid up in this, something like this somewhere.
It's weird that she flushed that way first, and then turned around and flushed back this way.
She flushed, landed right here, and then flushed and went back that way. Yep.
Oh, here she is. She's just sitting down in here, and I don't know if she's on a nest or what it is, but we're not gonna bother her because it is a little wet out today, but we're gonna let her continue nesting and we're gonna leave her alone.
Do you want to talk about just how far you're walking?
Yeah, so we drag a 200 by 300 meter plot. Right now we're walking the short side. We walk the 200 meter portion with the rope. We're rope dragging about 30 feet apart, just to kind of get an idea, close enough proximity to where we can kind of kick up a bird and cover this area between the rope between us. It allows us to just kind of hone in on these birds and stick to a kind of like a certain vegetation patch as well. While we're dragging, if we do kick up a bird, we'll yell flush, and we both are kind of keeping an eye on the rope, and at the same time trying to set down flags to make sure we're walking that straight transect. So there's a lot going on, you know. You're constantly not trying to fall into a hole in the ground. You're trying to look at the rope, make sure you're looking for flushes, and at the same time trying to put down flags to make sure you're walking those straight transects. And then you got the terrain as well. You know, we're walking up a hill right now, and that's something you got to keep in mind is with distances, keeping the tautness of the rope and making sure it's on the ground and at a good distance behind us, and make sure we're not dragging over any of that vegetation. All right.
You getting close?
So yeah, this drag today is going pretty quick. With the vegetation out here in the landscape that we're working on today being relatively flat, there's not a whole lot of topography here, and so this drag ends up going quick because at this point we've only found one nest. And so when you don't find many nests, you don't have to stop as much. The drag goes a lot quicker. Some of our other plots, they are a little bit more rigid in terms of the topography and in the hills we have. So contrary to popular belief, the Prairie pothole region of North Dakota specifically is not flat. So on average today, we're gonna be walking about 8 miles through these paddocks doing this. Like I said, we're about 3/4 of the way through now, and we'll see what this last quarter has to offer. But based on the vegetation, it's kind of that awkward stage between not having enough for meadowlarks and in terms of litter, but also it's almost a little overgrown for what we'd expect for typical longspur habitat. Some of the stuff in here too, it's not terribly dense, so we wouldn't expect to find many waterfowl, if any, in this kind of habitat. So because of the range of habitat on the landscape, there's gonna be a lot of different nests that we find on different plots. But today it's just, we drew the card on this plot and aren't finding exactly what we want, but we found one nest today, so that's good.
She's sitting right now. Yeah, she's not even gonna fly.
Oh, there she is. There. She got eggs or nestlings.
She's got eggs.
Right here. Yellow warbler, another one of our prairie species. Typically nest more so in the trees, but every once in a while when we find a good western snowberry patch, which is woody vegetation, they will nest in here as well. So
She moved she moved one. She had 4 eggs in a cowbird. Now she's got 2 eggs of her own. That's it.
Okay.
So she looks like she moved 2 out and pushed that cowbird egg out.
got a little friend with us out dragging today. This is a marbled godwit. Based on the way it's acting, I'm guessing it probably has some sort of brood or had a nest out here somewhere, because typically this is pretty typical when they do have something nearby that they're protective of. They do like to follow us around, and they'll keep us company throughout the day and keep squawking at us as we go.
Well, everything's going pretty well so far. This is our next. We got one more drag after this. It's going to be a little bit short because you try to get your drags as straight as possible and not have to have a little short drag at the end. But it had. Oh, we got a flush right there.
Drag at the end, but it had. Oh, we got a flush right there.
But as I was saying, you try to get it so you don't have to come back for a little short drag, but we're going to end up having to come back for one. It's right.
Yep, I got it.
You got it? Pull right past it.
She's only got 1 in there.
I'll let you get it. You can have that one. Let me get my paper out so I can write it for you.
Oh wow, she's actually pretty far along.
Really?
You said it's pretty far along.
Yeah, she's probably day 6, 7 incubation.
All right.
I think she's probably. I mean, she's definitely in the incubating stage then.
Yep.
I wonder if she kicked a couple out, or what she decided to do. I mean, it depends on what side you want to take it from. Over here is dirt.
Yeah, she's not even a centimeter.
Yeah, I
So
would
just
say.
call it 0.
Nothing there. Pretty big, huh?
All right. What's the date?
20th.
The 20th.
You want to see in there?
How on the egg would you say it's about 3/4 shaded?
Yeah, she's 6-7 days along on incubating it. Tell you want to do this?
Yep.
If you are.
Ten from the south. Ten from the west. See that'll tell us a little bit more about the density of the vegetation that she's nesting in. So typically these long spurs are in less than 10. A lot of the long spurs that we find are in 10 centimeters or less, and so we'll take that and use that too later on for instances, trying to understand more about habitat in general and how these grassland bird species are using it.
All right. It took a couple hours to get the entire drag done. We did end up finding 2 chestnut-collared longspur nests though, and a possible sharp-tailed grouse. Overall, I think it was pretty successful. We normally, on average, I feel, find maybe 2 to 3 nests per plot, per drag. If we're lucky, we'll get over on one of our other plots, we got 9 at one time. So overall, pretty good day. We're gonna head over, check some nests for the rest of the day, look at some ducks, and yeah, we'll wrap up the day that way.
I wasn't sure where he was turning, so I didn't want to buck down in front of him.
My name's Reese Lawson. I'm a Grassland Bird Technician through the University of North Dakota. And we're out here today doing some nest checks near Wing, North Dakota, looking for some grassland bird species. So yeah, this area here, we've done the rope drag here before, and we're just coming back to look for the nests that we've already found. We're going to check up on them, see if they've been depredated or if the eggs are showing further development. So our first nest is going to be up in that little patch of trees on the hill there. We're going to have an eastern kingbird nest up there. After that nest, we'll go past that hill, and our last nest will be about 1.5 miles back.
Perfect.
My name is Elijah Brovold. I'm another Grassland Bird Technician here for UND. When we find our nests for the nest searches or nest checks, we like to zero in on them with the GPSs, and then right now we're about 10 meters away. When we get closer, we try to triangulate with 2 pins that we have nearby in one of the cardinal directions. So we're just up here a little bit. Can be. So right there you'll see 1 pin. There she goes. Right there. So here we got chicks. We got 4 chicks in there. We had eggs last time, correct? Correct. Yeah, these ones are about 1 to 2 days old. Okay. Light pink bodies, a little bit of feathers, mostly down. Yeah, so with a nest check like this, or nest check like this, it's pretty simple, pretty quick. We like to get out of here as fast as we can. Let her get back on the nest and get back to being a good mom. So yeah, the nest we just checked was a clay-colored sparrow. The chicks are about 1 to 2 days old. It's important to understand how old they are, so then on future checks, 3 or 4 days down the line, we can get a more accurate aging then, as well as when they do end up fledging or no chicks are in the nest, we can understand better if it's been abandoned or depredated by predators, or if they successfully fledged. That's always our hope, but you know, understanding the nest failure is an important role here too. We like to limit our time at the nest to allow the mother to get back and back to her chicks. It helps prevent abandoning, and the less our scent is around the nest, the less likely it is to have predators notice, as well as trampling vegetation nearby. We like to leave it as close to natural as possible and limit our impacts we have upon it.
So you can see there on the north and west, we've got our pins. They're up high. Eastern kingbirds, they like to nest higher up. They're definitely not ground nesters. So seeing our 2 pins there, we can triangulate, and we can actually already see the nest, but we'll approach it and we'll probably get chipped at by the mama. And it looks like our eggs are gone. So, last time we checked these, the eggs were not very old. What was our day on the, she was probably still laying the eggs, huh?
Yeah, she was laying. There was only 2 eggs in the nest at that point.
Yeah. So that's a good indicator that she was still laying her eggs. So, how many days ago did we check that nest?
That was on the 17th, so
that was 4 days ago. So in 4 days, the eggs definitely would not have even been close to hatching yet. So by having that knowledge and putting that together, we can understand that, oh, these eggs didn't hatch. They were definitely depredated, or the nest was abandoned and something else happened to the eggs. Now we're gonna go over the hill, maybe 1/4 mile, 1/2 mile, and we're gonna check out the grasshopper nest, and then possibly meadowlark nest right after that.
Perfect.
Hold on to your hats.
we got chicks.
Okay.
We got 1 chick and 1 brewer egg.
Okay.
4 eggs. Wow. What did you have her last time?
90%.
Yeah, close to full.
Really?
There were 4 brewer eggs though. Could have missed if there was a dud.
There's definitely development going on in here, but it's not as far along as I think it should be at this point. Because she's got veins developing. There's some parts, but she's way behind. I'd say she's probably day 9, which is maybe about right if we have one hatched.
So we're missing the 2 cowbirds and
2 others. So initially we had 4 brewer's blackbird eggs and then 2 brown-headed cowbird eggs, which is an obligate nest parasite in this nest here. Come back today and all of a sudden there's only 2 brewer's blackbirds, one's an egg, one's a nestling. And so it's somewhere in between the last time we checked it 4 days ago and today, we've lost a couple of eggs and a couple of nestlings potentially. So at this point, we're gonna make sure to candle the last egg to make sure it's still developing like we think it should. But otherwise, this is a partially depredated nest at this point.
So this here, it's an empty meadowlark nest, definitely depredated. Last time we were here at this nest, there were 4 eggs inside, right? 4 eggs? 5. There were 5 eggs inside of this nest previously, and coming to the nest now, it's empty. Based on the time span from the last time we checked, we know that if the eggs successfully hatched, that we would have nestlings here in this nest. However, this is an empty nest, and that tells us that something went wrong here. Most likely it was a predator.
So like you guys said, was a meadowlark nest, and this is pretty typical because they have this little entrance, little tunnel, nice kind of deep nest pocket and nest bowl down here in the grass. But when you get a little closer, you can see, like the guy said, there's no nestlings in here like there should be. So we look at the nest and you can see the nest has been ripped apart a little bit up here on top. It's obviously disturbed. If it was a pure nest and a normal nest, this would all be intact on top, real nicely folded over and tucked in a little bit to kind of hide that little funnel and hide that meadowlark nest. But of course, like Reese just told you, something obviously came along and got these nestlings. So this unfortunately will be a failed nest in our books. Probably a skunk. Stand aside like that. So here's sadly another case of our unsuccessful nest of a gadwall hen. So something obviously came along in the last couple of days, tore her what was a nest bowl here apart, and you can see we still have a couple eggshells laying around. But ultimately this will be a failed nest as well, just because again something came along and ate it. So now that we know this, we'll take a post VOR on it and kind of see what see if there's any natural habitat factors that may be contributing to this. So we'll put it back up, we'll take some post veg on it, trample it too much.
So we had a drought last year, and looking at this plot, whole thing was mostly brown grass, not higher than your ankles, but this year there's points where it gets up to your hips and it's just growing incredibly.
So Elijah has been telling you how quickly the grass was growing. When we first came to this nest and found it, the grass was only to the height of this pin here. And already, let me cover up the grass, you'd have no idea where that pin was even there.
And ultimately, that's all a factor of the precipitation. It's been really wet in the prairie this year, so we do have continual grass growth, which is great for a lot of the birds that we have here, especially in terms of cattle production. It's great for cattle, it's great for ducks, it's great for birds.
Nice. I saw this and I was like, oh no. But thankfully she didn't come out of there.
Where's the nest at?
We're right here. But that isn't that long. Oh no, it wasn't that long. There we go. This is a blue-winged teal nest. one of the smaller duck species. Taylor's got one of the eggs there, candling it, looking for egg development. This is a good nest. She's still got a lot of eggs in here. She was on the nest, keeping them warm and keeping them from getting too warm. And yeah, hopefully after not too long, we'll have some chicks here.
So these eggs are actually pipping. So these eggs are actually starting to crack right here. And so they're not too far away from hatching. They're gonna hatch here probably in the next few hours or so. Because they are starting to crack. You can see where some of them, like this one right here, you can see the egg hole, or the hole that she's starting to push out from her eggs. So these are actually a really exciting time for this blue-wing, because she is really close to being a successful nest. And once she does hatch, she will be able to lead her brood in the direction of the nearest wetland to ultimately lead these broods to live a happy life. Once they do that, then eventually they'll graduate to the fall migration, to where they'll start migrating down the flyways. Really exciting time. So this one is pipping. Yep. So this one, yeah, even that one, like, look at that. We got that pipping, the pipping there, where that duckling is pushing out on the egg with her egg tooth. And like I said, that's actually a really small egg, so I'm surprised this one's actually still viable, but really, really neat. So we'll put that back in there, and we're gonna cover that one up right away. Actually, if you listen closely, you can hear them. She can come back, she can incubate and then lead them away. That's so cool. Nice. All right, let's get out of here. Walk a little bit away and you can do a follow-up.
So coming away from that blue-wing, it's really exciting. Sadly, not a lot of the ducks are too successful out here, so when we do get one, it's pretty exciting for the team as a whole, let alone just Reese and I. This will be our first successful duck nest of the year. We'll finish it up next week as a success, and we'll let her get back to it.
So we're sitting down here now, just chatting quickly a little bit about the habitat that we experience out here on the prairies. The stuff that you see around me right now is mostly non-native invasive type grasses. So we have alfalfa. So this is mostly actually a tame grass field, but you have a lot of formerly planted hay field. But it's got a lot of alfalfa, and you see a lot of Kentucky bluegrass and smooth brome. And these species are kind of important to recognize out of the landscape, because what they do is they really map the ground with all of this litter. This litter is actually really important for a lot of nesting bird species, like that meadowlark we just talked about and the grasshopper sparrow that we saw earlier. They use a lot of that litter to create their nests, but the problem is when you get a lot of this non-native grass, invasive grass like the smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass, it ends up just creating a mat down here on the land, down here on the ground. And what that mat of litter and that grass does, it prevents a lot of the native species from being able to nest down here, or native plant species to be able to grow out of here. So when there's that much shade cover, those native species that might be in the seed bed down here can't really even grow. Of course, that affects our grassland birds, because the more of this we have out here, the less some of our shorter nesting species might be able to thrive. As you can see, like I said earlier, we're sitting down on this grass, and it's actually almost up to my shoulders, and I'm about 6'1" when I'm standing up. So you can see that this grass grows quickly, like the guys were talking about earlier, and it doubles with just a little bit of precipitation. It can shoot straight up and really provide some really good dense nesting habitat for different species. But also, if we have a landscape full of this, it does end up inhibiting some species from being able to successfully nest. So now that we've kind of gotten away a lot from the real dense smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass and alfalfa, we're kind of getting more into a little bit different habitat here. So this is, as you can see, for one, the grass isn't nearly as tall, so it does open up some grass and some ground space for different birds, especially species like Vesper sparrow, even some of the grasshopper sparrows and clay-colored sparrows, especially like some of the snowberry like you see down here. This stuff isn't real tall, but some of the taller patches around us will host some of those clay-colored sparrows. Aside from that, we do have other prairie plants around here, native prairie, like this is prairie smoke. Once it starts blooming out, and then it'll end up looking more like this. Right here below you, there's actually some blue stem coming up. It's just starting to grow, because it is more of a warm season grass. And then we also have some what they call Indian breadroot, is the kind of more common name in this area. So these are kind of the major species we think of, or some of the major species that we see on the landscape. They definitely contribute to more native habitat for different grassland bird species. So as I mentioned with the smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass over there, it ends up matting the ground real bad, whereas here you don't really have that real thick litter depth. So it does allow these native species to be able to thrive. Again, some species rely on heavy litter depth for grassland birds. Other species not so much. Other species perform more over bare ground. As I mentioned, you know, species like Vesper sparrows, hornlarks don't like a lot of litter depth on the ground. So the heterogeneity of this landscape really does attract a large diversity of birds that we have up here in the species. As I may have mentioned at one point this year already, we've got 124 some bird nests, which accounts for 18 different species of birds. So the heterogeneous landscape really does help out a lot of our native bird species thrive. So we're really thankful as part of our project to be able to stay here at the Congregational Inn here in Wing, North Dakota. As I mentioned earlier, it's really hard to do this project without any of our help from local people. So we're really thankful to the Congregational Inn and Julie Hine for their help in finding us housing and allowing us to stay here over the summer. So let's go check out what the inside conditions look like. Finding this field housing is extremely hard to come by. So we're lucky enough today to house our technicians here while we do a lot of our work. And like I said earlier, we're gonna go see what's inside and kind of show you guys around, because this really is a great place to stay, great place to live. And without people like this, we really can't do a lot of the work that we do. So the inside of the inn, we have the bathroom here. We do have a really nice dining area. We've got a fridge, of course, to keep all of our food and beer cold. We've got our little dining room set up. I know a couple of guys like to play games. Right now, all my techs are actually working together. They're planning a trip to the Black Hills this coming weekend. So again, this is what we were talking about earlier on the podcast, so make sure you check out the podcast. But talking about getting along with people and having that relationship, these guys are all planning out their own trip to South Dakota, go birding, check out some of the sites down in South Dakota in the Black Hills, see some mountain goats I know they're interested in. So doing some really cool stuff and really cool planning. Aside from the cooking and the coffee, of course, coffee stations we got set up. We got the living room. There's no Wi-Fi here because we are in a small town. Wi-Fi is a huge thing out here, and plus it really does encourage us to get outside and enjoy the outdoors. But we do have, we've got DirecTV here, thankfully. Again, Julie is an incredible host here for us, and it has just a great little house for us to call home while we're doing our fieldwork in the summer. But we do have DirecTV. Of course, we got to watch our hockey games. We watch our baseball games. I know that Stanley Cup finals are going on. We got the NCAA College World Series going on. But if there is any arguments that we never do settle, we always settle them on the foosball table. So we do have this little foosball table right here, access, and again, arguments are settled here. If people do have questions, we do have resource books for us available. This comes from my personal collection, as well as Susan's personal collection, or Dr. Feligi's for personal collection. We do use those for reference.
Well, that's what I'm saying is what cars we
Now the Congregational Inn has 3 bedrooms upstairs, 3 downstairs that we do use. So in here, in this room right here, number 1, there's 2 twin beds. It's kind of set up kind of like a college dorm room a little bit. So there's 2 technicians that will spend the night here on those beds. Me personally, I take the captain's room. I'm lucky enough to be able to call this room home for 3 months. So we've got a couch in here. We've got a place to sleep. So I'll come in here sometimes. I'll sit on my little rocking chair and I'll get stuff typed out. My computer's plugged in. I've got my fans going because there's not central air conditioning. So we do have a couple window units that Julie was gracious enough to let us use and borrow for the summers. But other than that, we rely a lot on window and natural coolers like cool air and the cool nights that we have up here in North Dakota. Lastly, we do have, there's one guy I think in there right now, but we do have one more room in there that has another kind of nice queen bed. Queen bed to use. So we do have that as a resource as well. If not that, there is a full basement that they're working on remodeling right now to have a kind of a full bed, full bath. And right now it's just set up as one big communal room for guys to sleep in and enjoy. One more thing I'll show you about this house that's really nice. Of course, we've got the backyard. So out here we've got all of our field vehicles ready to go. We've got the 2 Jeeps ready. And then of course everyone owns personal cars, so there's plenty of places to park, plenty of space to park your own vehicles and personal vehicles. She's got a grill for us to use here that we do use regularly for ourselves, but if you're taking a trip up in the area, if you ever find yourself coming near Wing, North Dakota, whether it's for a birding trip or for a hunting trip, please make sure to check out this Airbnb because it is a great place to stay, great place to rent, and the town of Wing really are incredible hosts. So if we're hungry, we will go to the Cenex store. They have the gas station. They've got plenty of food to choose from as well. but also Red's Lucky Spur in town if you need something to drink. They've got pop, they've got water, they've got your beer and liquor if you're into that. They've also got great pizza, so definitely check this out. Check out this small town of Wing, and be sure to visit here if it's ever on your radar. In a typical day, we would be out dragging in the morning, and then we'll go do our nest checks. After our nest checks are done, we'll actually sit down and enter in all of our data from the day. We'll enter in the data from new nests found. We'll enter data in from nest checks from previous nests that we're kind of keeping track of every 3 to 4 days, and we'll put them into a spreadsheet. Now, everything goes into the spreadsheet from every visit that we ever do until it's faded out. So the red lines that you see here are nests that were unsuccessful. The green lines represent nests that were successful. And we just keep track of those throughout the season, so we kind of keep in our heads and with all my techs and all of my guys out there working to keep track of what nests we need to go check and keep count on. On top of that, I'm also, from the background, from a kind of a management standpoint, I'm keeping a rolling total of numbers of nests, dates that we're finding them, and how we're finding them, kind of on a rolling basis. And this really helps us communicate with our project partners from North Dakota Game and Fish, Ducks Unlimited, and the Nature Conservancy, so we can kind of keep them in the loop of what we're seeing on the ground and how that compares to years past, for example, and just even how we're progressing through the summer. So I typically try to give them several updates throughout the summer, just so they can see that we are see where we're at and kind of where we're going, and even projections on the year. So thus far this year, right now we're currently sitting at 124 nests at this point in the year, which is, it's a little behind where we were in the years past, but ultimately we are seeing some differences compared to last year. This is year 2 out of a 3-year study, so we are seeing some differences, but it's a little early on to start getting into the nitty-gritty of what does this all mean. I will say at this point in the year, last year during the drought, we had 22 total duck nests. And this year already we're at about 36, and so we are seeing an uptick in the amount of duck nests that we are finding. But like I said, overall we are finding a lot of songbirds. They're kind of the focus and kind of a center point of our study. At this point, about 27% of our nests are clay-colored sparrows, and then the most abundant waterfowl that we have are the blue-winged teal. So once we get to the end game and once we're kind of done with the season, I'll wrap up everything and kind of put it into a nice graphic. This is here in the background photo. You see a chestnut-collared long sparrow photo by one of my technicians, Matt Mezowitz. But we do account, and we kind of create some cool graphics to share within our partners and within our organization at University of North Dakota. So you've got a grasshopper sparrow here, same same exact table here, but just a different kind of graphic for folks to use. On top of that, once we kind of have all of our stuff calculated and have some generic statistics done, we'll actually format it all into a report that we'll also send out to those partners at Game and Fish, Ducks Unlimited, and TNC. Just kind of highlighting what we found and re-going through some of our objectives, study area, and some of the preliminary results that we found. So again, last year 316 total nests last year, and so we hope to beat that this year with more species out there. Again, we're about halfway there now, just under halfway there. But we have 18 total species, whereas last year in total we had 31. So we hope to continue getting our species diversity up there. So at this point we are starting to see some differences is what we are starting to find. For example, some of our brewer's blackbirds, some of our eastern kingbirds, and grasshopper sparrows are starting to prefer one grazing method over the other. Typically they kind of like that high intensity short duration grazing, and that could also be a site factor. Again, we haven't totally run these analyses yet because we're waiting on that long-term data set to really get into that. But we're starting to see some of these trends on the landscape, and so we'll be very interested to see if these hold up and try to figure out if there are certain species that associate with certain grazing methods. This map is not showing up like I hoped it would, but this is kind of where we're working at. So this is the North Dakota in the hashed line here, the real light yellow. You get the Prairie pothole region, and we're right here in the Missouri Coteau, in that hard yellow. So we have all of our sites from anywhere from Wing up to Russo, North Dakota. We're working everywhere in between too with some of these landowners on their properties, and ultimately finding ranchers who are willing to let us out there and work in their paddocks, which we have very generous landowners who are very gracious enough to allow us access. Some of the vegetation stuff we also compile and try to understand a little bit more about the pre to post grazing differences. As I mentioned before, we're very interested to see how these cattle between the two grazing methods specifically are getting in and grazing these grasslands, because ultimately that's going to affect things like bird community, nest success, bird community diversity. That's going to tell us a lot about that, and so we can draw inferences later on about what they look like based on what the vegetation is looking like out in those paddocks. Additionally, we also look at species composition of our vegetation just to kind of get an idea and a snapshot of what's out there on the landscape. especially when it comes to some of the non-native invasive species like smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass, and that's of course very dominant upon a lot of our study sites up here in the upper Great Plains. That's kind of a gist of what it looks like at the end. Again, this is the final report that we'll share with all of our project partners at the end of each season, and then once this is all done, we hope to be able to put this into a dissertation, but also be able to publish some very good scientific articles that we write to kind of inform the scientific community about different management implications that may be a result of different grazing methods. So yeah, but aside of that, that's kind of a day in the nutshell, or a couple days in a nutshell of what it's like to be out here on the grasslands and doing the work that we do. But we really thank you all for watching and tuning in today. We thank Derek and Campus Waterfowl for coming out here and featuring this. If you do like the video, make sure you like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more updates. I know he's got some other things in store for it. But if you have other questions too, feel free to shoot me a message somewhere. But yeah, follow, like us on Instagram, and hope to see you guys in the future.